I've never told anyone this story, not the whole truth of it anyway. To do so would be to invite the kind of psychiatric scrutiny I've spent the last 5 years desperately avoiding. But the memory has a weight to it, a physical presence in my mind that festers and grows heavier with each passing storm. It started, as so many strange nights do, with the rain. Before we begin, I want to thank you for being here. I know many of you use these scary stories to relax and fall asleep, and I'm doing my best to grow this little channel. Please subscribe, turn on the bell, and share your feedback. It helps me a lot. Let me know in the comments things like, are the stories too long or too short? Do you want more sound effects? Is the narration calming enough? Your words keep me going. Now, let's dive in. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of night where the wind sounds like it's trying to peel the shingles off your roof one by one. I was living alone back then, in a small suburban house on a quiet, tree-lined street. My neighbor, Mr. Henderson, was a creature of absolute habit, a retired widower whose life ran on the silent, precise gears of a Swiss watch. Every morning, his newspaper was retrieved at 6:15 a.m. Every Saturday, the rhythmic snip-snip-snip of his hedge clippers would echo through the neighborhood at precisely 9 a.m. His predictability was a comfort, a part of the landscape. That night, the storm was a monster. Rain hammered against the windows in sheets, and thunder cracked so close and loud it felt like the sky was splitting open directly overhead. I was trying to read, but the constant flickering of the lights was giving me a headache. Around 11:30 p.m., with a final, apologetic buzz, the house plunged into absolute darkness. I sighed, fumbled for my phone to use its flashlight, and resigned myself to an early night. That's when it happened. It wasn't one device, it was all of them. My phone, dead in my hand just a second before, flared to life, its screen a piercing, clinical white. Across the room, my laptop, which had been closed and unplugged, chimed on. The television in the living room hissed, its black screen flooding the dark space with a strobing, static-filled light. An old digital alarm clock by my bed, one I hadn't used in years, began to blare a high-pitched, insistent tone. Every screen displayed the same thing, the familiar jarring red and white banner of an emergency alert system broadcast. But the text scrolling beneath it was wrong. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language I could recognize. It was a series of jagged, spidery symbols that seemed to crawl across the screen. Then came the voice. It wasn't the monotone, robotic drone of the EAS. This was a voice that emanated from every speaker at once, a layered, guttural sound that was both a deep rumble and a wet, sibilant whisper. It spoke in a language of chitinous clicks and long, drawn-out vowels that scraped at the inside of my ears. The sound was ancient and utterly alien. It didn't feel like a warning. It felt like an incantation. I stood frozen in the center of my bedroom, a prisoner in a cage of light and sound. The air grew cold, thick with the smell of ozone and something else. Something faintly metallic and organic like old blood. The voice repeated the same phrase over and over, its cadence hypnotic and terrifying. 2 words, or what sounded like 2 words, drilled themselves into my brain. Kelen-vor, Kelen-tak. The broadcast lasted for maybe 3 minutes, though it felt like an eternity. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Every device went silent. The screens went black. A moment later, the house lights flickered back on with a hum, the refrigerator kicking in with a familiar groan. The storm outside continued to rage, but the unnatural silence inside was deafening. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers shaking as I unlocked it. The battery was at 78%, as it had been before the outage. No record of the alert. I checked my laptop. Nothing. I turned on the TV and flipped to the local news channel. A tired-looking meteorologist was pointing at a weather map, talking about the severity of the thunderstorm. We've had reports of scattered power outages across the county, she said, but no other major incidents to report. No other incidents. No emergency broadcast. I spent the next hour scouring the internet, searching for any mention of a hacked EAS, a system-wide glitch, anything. I found nothing. Not a single post on social media, not a mention on a forum, not a hint that anyone else had experienced what I just had. It was impossible. My mind started to race, trying to rationalize it. A waking dream? A neurological event brought on by the stress of the storm? I told myself it had to be. I forced myself to believe it. Eventually, exhausted and unnerved, I fell into a fitful sleep, the strange words still echoing in the back of my mind. Kelen-vor, Kelen-tak. The next morning, the world seemed determined to prove my sanity. The sun was out, the sky was a brilliant, wash-clean blue, and the only evidence of the storm was the damp pavement and scattered leaves. I felt foolish. It was a dream, a vivid nightmare. I made coffee, my anxiety slowly ebbing away with each familiar step of my morning routine. It was around 8 a.m. when I noticed it. Mr. Henderson's newspaper was still lying in its plastic sleeve at the end of his driveway. That was wrong. By now, he'd have not only read it, but likely finished the crossword. I watched his house for another hour. No movement. The perfect, unwavering stillness of the place started to feel less like peaceful retirement and more like a tomb. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I walked across the lawn, my shoes squelching in the damp grass. "Mr. Henderson," I called, knocking on his front door. "Arthur, are you okay in there?" There was no answer. I tried the knob. Unlocked. Another red flag. Mr. Henderson locked his door even when he was just out trimming the hedges. I pushed the door open a few inches, my heart beginning to thud with a familiar dread. "Arthur?" That's when I saw it. It wasn't written in ink or paint. It was carved into the rich, dark wood of his front door, gouged deep as if by a claw or a shard of bone. The splinters around the edges were raw and fresh. 2 words. Kelen-vor, Kelen-tak. I backed away from the door, a cold wave of nausea washing over me. I called the police. They came, they looked around, they saw a tidy, empty house with a cold cup of tea on the kitchen table. When I tried to explain about the carving, they just looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. They called it vandalism. They filed a missing person report and told me he'd probably turn up in a day or two, having visited a relative without telling anyone. He never did. Arthur Henderson vanished from the face of the earth. I moved out of that house 6 months later. I couldn't stand the silence, or the way I'd catch myself staring at his empty windows. I still live with the fear, a low, constant hum beneath the surface of my life. I don't know what that broadcast was. A warning? A signal? Sometimes, late at night when a storm is brewing, I think I can hear it, faintly, in the static between radio stations or in the whine of the wind. A guttural whisper. Kelen-vor, Kelen-tak. And a terrifying thought occurs to me. What if it wasn't a message for us at all? What if it was a roll call? And what if, that night, Mr. Henderson answered,